All right, so you know why you were here.
Yeah.
You like to really get into some big ideas,
Mm.
but you don't have all day to do it. So today we're going to jump right into part 3 of Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra.
Yeah. Think of this as like the highlight reel,
Okay.
a fast track to the core of it. Nietzsche can be tough going sometimes.
Hmm.
So what we're going to do is pull out those really vivid images that stick with you, the stuff that's still controversial even today, and of course the big concepts he is wrestling with,
Right.
especially this idea of the eternal recurrence. And along the way, we will hit those moments that, just grab you emotionally or maybe present a philosophical problem that you are thinking about, hours later.
Yeah.
We will also pull out some of those quotes that just, they pack a punch.
Perfect.
A whole world of thought in a single sentence.
Now, I think anyone who has tried to read Nietzsche knows he is not exactly writing, airport fiction here.
Uh-huh. Right.
So that's what we are here for. So one of the first things that struck me is Zarathustra's journey in part 3. He kind of goes down from the mountain, right? We've seen hints of this before, and then eventually he climbs back up.
Right.
What's the significance of that whole up and down movement?
Well, the interesting thing there is how that kind of mirrors the process of, actually gaining wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
It's not this like straight shot, you just climb up the mountain of enlightenment and there you are.
Yeah, you don't just stay up there in your ivory tower.
Exactly. The descent is crucial.
Okay.
That's where, he encounters the real world.
Let's hands dirty a little bit.
He observes, he learns, he maybe even gets, knocked around a bit.
Yeah.
And when he climbs back up, it's not back to that same, naive solitude.
Right.
It's more like a higher understanding informed by what he's gone through.
So it's not just about retreating from the world. It's about engaging with it.
Yeah.
And then using that experience.
Exactly.
Taking that back up with you.
Yeah. And think about any time you have really learned something truly profound. It rarely happens without, getting out there, facing some challenges, and then reflecting on it.
Yeah, wisdom is not just up there in the clouds. You got to come down to earth sometimes.
Haha, that's a good way to put it.
And speaking of powerful imagery, we get the Superman right out of the gate, described as the meaning of the earth and lightning out of a dark cloud.
Yeah. Some serious imagery there.
What are we supposed to take away from that when we first encounter that?
Well, I think this is where Nietzsche throws down a real challenge.
Okay.
This isn't, the Superman from the comics.
Right.
It's like a philosophical goal almost.
Okay.
This is the individual who has overcome the limitations of, conventional morality and that nihilism that Nietzsche sees creeping into society.
Right, as the old values are kind of crumbling.
Exactly. So think of it as this ultimate project of self-overcoming.
Okay, so it's not about powers. It's about
embracing what he calls the will to power.
Okay, and not in some kind of, domineering sense,
Not at all.
but as a drive towards creating something.
Exactly. That inherent drive within you to become more, to create, to affirm life in all its, messiness. Okay.
And that lightning image, it suggests this sudden breakthrough.
Yeah.
This radical new way of being that cuts through all the, the cobwebs of old ideas.
It's like a bolt of inspiration.
Yeah, what I find powerful is just the sheer ambition of it.
Okay.
The idea that humanity isn't some finished product.
Right.
We can become something more.
And it's not even necessarily about being better than other people. It's just about being better.
More yourself. Yeah, I think that's closer to it.
Now, part 3, it's not all these, pronouncements from on high, though.
Right.
There's a lot of, real intense emotion there, too. Sections on friendship, solitude, even how to die.
Yeah.
They all carry this real weight.
They do.
What did you pick up on in terms of the emotional landscape in this part?
Well, you see this deep sense of loneliness.
Okay.
The loneliness that can come with seeing the world differently from everyone else, with being ahead of your time.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But it's not just, wallowing in sadness.
It's often right next to this intense joy of creation, of giving your gifts and wisdom to the world.
Okay.
Think about those passages on the bestowing virtue. Nietzsche explores this paradox of wanting to give freely, but knowing that your gift might be misunderstood or even rejected.
Yeah, you put something out there and people just aren't ready for it.
Exactly. And it raises this really human question, How do you share something you deeply believe in with a world that might not be ready for it?
And that feels so relevant now, right? With all the noise and division and everything else.
Totally. I think it's a struggle a lot of people feel.
Okay, let's switch gears to a much darker image.
Okay.
The state as the coldest of all cold monsters.
Ooh, yeah.
That's a pretty rough assessment.
It is.
What is at the heart of Nietzsche's problem with the state?
Well, for Nietzsche, the state, in its modern form, it represents this kind of mass conformity
Okay.
that crushes individual potential.
So it's like it's putting everyone in a box.
In a way, yeah, he sees it as something that hides its true nature behind these big pronouncements about the people.
Okay.
But really, it fosters a kind of spiritual death.
Through just making everyone the same.
Right, by suppressing different voices, promoting this herd mentality.
So when he calls it a cold monster, he is emphasizing that kind of impersonal nature.
Exactly. It's like a machine,
Okay.
devoid of any real warmth or empathy for the truly unique person.
Yeah, it's a warning against losing yourself in the crowd.
It is. Have you ever felt that pull towards conformity, even when it meant, quieting a part of yourself?
Oh, absolutely.
That's the pressure Nietzsche is warning us about.
Okay, now this one really threw me for a loop.
Okay.
We get this very strange image of a shepherd with a snake crawling into his throat,
Right.
and this command to bite. Bite.
Yeah, what's going on there, right?
What is happening there?
This is one of those moments that's just loaded with symbolism,
Yeah.
open to a lot of interpretations. You could see this serpent as representing some kind of dangerous idea that has, worked its way into the shepherd's very being.
Okay.
Maybe it's a belief that denies life or some deep-seated resentment.
Got it.
And that cry to bite its head off that suggests this radical act of self-overcoming.
All right, so like ripping out that bad idea by the root.
Yeah, it's not some gentle suggestion for self-improvement.
No, it's much more violent than that.
It's like a primal scream for a fundamental change.
So what kind of serpents might we all be harboring without even realizing it?
Ooh, that's a good question for all of us to think about.
Yeah, and that sense of unease continues
Okay.
with the Soothsayer's vision.
Mm-hmm.
Pure weariness, that cry of all is empty, all is alike, all hath been.
It's the voice of nihilism right there.
Yeah, so what's the emotional weight of that moment within Zarathustra's whole journey?
Well, the Soothsayer embodies the abyss that Nietzsche is trying to steer us away from.
Okay.
The belief that life is ultimately meaningless,
Right.
that everything just repeats in a pointless cycle.
It's like the opposite of everything Zarathustra is saying.
Exactly. And it hits him hard because it's the antithesis of his whole life-affirming philosophy.
Mhm.
It's that seductive pull of despair.
But he doesn't just give in to it.
No, it's crucial because it forces him to really confront this ultimate challenge,
Yeah.
to find an answer to this sense of emptiness.
Okay.
And this leads directly to the concept of eternal recurrence.
All right, so it's like Nietzsche shows us the worst case scenario so we understand how important it is to find something better.
I think that's a great way to look at it.
So Zarathustra himself isn't, some emotionless robot.
Right.
We see his great longing
Yeah.
and these really poetic descriptions of his soul.
Yeah.
What do those moments tell us about his inner world in part 3?
Well, I think they give us a glimpse behind the mask, that great longing. It speaks to this desire for connection.
Someone who gets it.
Yeah, for others who can understand and carry forward his message.
And the metaphors he uses for his soul.
Yeah.
A vine laden with wisdom, overflowing with gifts, but also feeling a sense of shame at not finding anyone worthy to receive them.
Right.
It really highlights the burden of being a visionary.
It does. It's not some triumphant figure we see here.
Yeah.
It's someone wrestling with the loneliness of being ahead of the curve.
That makes him seem much more human and relatable.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we got the Convalescent,
Okay.
often seen as a real turning point.
Mm-hmm.
And Zarathustra says some really wild stuff in there.
He does.
He talks about the baddest things being necessary.
Right.
That's tough to swallow.
It is.
What's going on there?
Well, the Convalescent is where Zarathustra is really grappling with the implications of eternal recurrence and this whole idea about the baddest things being necessary.
Yeah.
That's part of this radical affirmation of all of existence.
Okay.
He is saying that even suffering, even what we call evil,
It all serves a purpose.
it has its place in the grand scheme of things.
Okay.
And overcoming those challenges can lead to the greatest growth.
So it's not about denying the bad stuff.
No, it's about embracing it as part of the whole.
One of the things we hate.
Yeah, it's a total rejection of this, sanitized view of reality.
Like we can just pick and choose the good stuff.
Exactly. He is saying if everything repeats, then even the things you hate have to be embraced as part of the eternal cycle.
That really challenges our moral judgments.
It does.
Okay, now we also see some symbolic acts in part 3.
Okay.
Things like the honey sacrifice and Zarathustra as a fisher of men.
Yeah.
What are these images trying to tell us?
Well, the honey sacrifice suggests an offering of something sweet and valuable,
Right.
like Zarathustra's wisdom, his insights.
He is putting it out there.
He's putting it out there in the hope that it will nourish others.
And the fisher of men, that has some obvious, biblical echoes.
It does.
So what's he fishing for?
Well, he is trying to draw people away from their current beliefs and towards his own philosophy. But it's not just about conversion,
It's something more.
Yeah, it's about elevating them, pulling them up to his level of understanding.
Up towards that self-overcoming.
Right.
And it's not just, the average person on the street.
Okay.
In Talk of the Kings, we have these powerful figures seeking him out.
Yeah, King's the Pope.
What does it mean that these guys are coming to Zarathustra?
I think it shows a disillusionment with traditional sources of authority and meaning.
These are people at the top, and they are still not fulfilled.
Exactly. They have reached the pinnacle of worldly power and found it wanting.
So they are hoping Zarathustra has the answer.
Right. They recognize a hollowness in their roles and are seeking something more authentic.
It really indicts those established institutions.
It does. It's saying they are failing to provide real fulfillment.
We also get that encounter with the spiritually conscientious one and that description of the unknown God in the Leech.
Yeah, a very internal struggle there.
What's going on in that section?
Well, the spiritually conscientious one represents this rigid adherence to a moral code.
Oh,
Even to the point of self-torment.
like punishing themselves.
Yeah, it's a warning against this joyless, self-flagellating kind of morality.
Okay.
And the unknown God as this tormenting force within the soul that speaks to the lingering effects of old beliefs and doubts.
Even after you think you've moved on.
Exactly. It shows how difficult it can be to truly free yourself from those ingrained religious or moral frameworks.
Then we get this really surprising scene,
Okay.
almost comical,
Yeah.
with the higher men worshiping the ass
Uh-huh. Right.
and the ugliest man somehow being content.
Totally unexpected.
What's the message there?
Well, I think it's a jab at blind faith.
Okay.
That human tendency to latch onto even the most absurd things for meaning.
We are meaning-making machines.
We are, and the ugliest man being content, that's even more interesting.
Yeah.
It suggests that even those who seem to have the least can find peace and self-acceptance.
Just by embracing who they are.
Right, without striving for some ideal version of themselves.
It's a challenge to our ideas of beauty and worth.
It is.
And right before we get to the Eternal Recurrence, we have these pronouncements of midnight.
In the Seven Seals.
Right, with that cyclical view of joy and woe.
Yeah.
What's the feel of those passages and how important are they?
Well, there is this sense of revelation in the air.
Yeah.
Midnight for Nietzsche is often when deeper truths emerge.
When the distractions of the day are gone.
Exactly. And those pronouncements about joy, wanting eternity, the cyclical nature of things, joy and sorrow, pain and pleasure, they are all setting the stage for the eternal recurrence.
All right, so let's get into some of the controversial stuff in part 3.
Okay, let's do it.
We touched on the Superman, but let's break it down.
Okay.
How does it connect to the will to power, transvaluation of all values, and rejecting all those life-denying values?
Okay, so think of the will to power as this fundamental force.
Okay.
It's that drive in you to grow, to overcome, to create. And the transvaluation of all values, that's the process of reevaluating traditional morals.
From a fresh perspective.
Yeah, through a life-affirming lens, questioning anything that seems to diminish our vitality.
Yeah.
The Superman is the one who has actually done this.
We've successfully navigated this whole process.
He has embraced his will to power in a creative way, rejected those life-denying values, things like excessive pity or self-denial, and created his own values that affirm the richness of existence.
It's about taking control of your own life.
It is. It's not about being all-powerful, like, shooting lasers from your eyes.
Right.
It's about having power over yourself to shape your own meaning.
Okay, so Nietzsche's critique of pity is another one that gets people fired up.
It does.
He says on The Pitiful that it can actually make suffering worse.
Right.
That seems kind of backwards.
It does, doesn't it?
So what is he getting at there?
Well, he sees pity as often coming from a sense of superiority in the person who is pitying someone else.
Not actual empathy.
Yeah, and he argues that it weakens both people involved.
I feel so.
The giver might get caught up in a feeling of moral righteousness, and the receiver can become dependent and resentful.
Yeah, they don't actually grow from it.
Exactly. He thinks pity can prevent people from facing their challenges head on.
And developing their own strength.
Right. He even says that God died of pity for humanity.
Wow. Okay.
Oh.
So it's a really provocative idea.
It is. He wants us to question our assumptions about compassion.
And then there is his reevaluation of voluptuousness.
Passion for power, selfishness.
Yeah, he says these aren't inherently evil.
They are forces to be understood.
That's a big departure from traditional morality.
It is. He wants us to look beyond these simplistic judgments.
Okay.
He suggests that these drives, when channeled correctly, can be powerful forces for creation and self-overcoming.
So voluptuousness.
That's an affirmation of the body.
Okay.
And our senses, our experience of the world.
And passion for power. We talked about that.
That's that fundamental life force. And selfishness. Even selfishness, when it's not petty or destructive,
Can be a good thing.
it can be a necessary part of self-preservation and pursuing your goals.
Okay.
It's about moving towards a more nuanced ethical framework.
A more life-affirming one.
Right.
Now, there is that line in Of Old and New Tables. Dead are all the gods. Now do we desire the Superman to live.
Big statement.
So how does he connect the loss of religious faith with wanting this higher type of human being?
Well, for Nietzsche, the death of God isn't just about religion.
It's bigger than that.
It's about the collapse of this whole system of values and meaning.
That Western civilization was built on.
Right, for centuries.
And so we are left with this void.
Exactly. And the desire for the Superman emerges from that void.
Okay.
It's humanity stepping up to create its own meaning.
In the absence of God.
Right. The Superman represents the potential for us to rise to that challenge, to become the creators of our own purpose.
He also takes aim at that mind-body split.
Right, that old dualism.
And he says the self and the body are greater than the ego and spirit.
It's a reversal of traditional thinking.
It is.
He is pushing back against those traditions that put down the body.
In favor of the spirit.
Right. He says our conscious ego is just a small part of who we are.
Okay.
And that the body with its instincts and passions
Is actually more fundamental.
more powerful even.
That really grounds his philosophy in our physical existence.
He does.
Instead of some abstract spiritual realm,
It's about embracing our whole being.
body and mind.
Exactly.
Now, I know this is from part 1,
Okay.
but that metaphor of the 3 metamorphoses,
The camel, the lion, the child.
it feels really relevant here when thinking about how someone might become this Superman.
It does.
How does that work?
Well, the journey from the camel who carries the weight of tradition
Okay.
to the lion who roars no to those values.
That's a necessary step.
It is a step towards liberation.
And
But the ultimate transformation is into the child,
who represents what?
who can create new values with innocence and joy.
Okay.
So breaking free from those old constraints,
Mhm.
creating your own meaning.
That's central to the whole idea of the Superman.
It is.
Now, we can't forget his attack on the state,
Right. He does not let up on that.
calling it a lying, cold monster that's pushing us towards a slow suicide.
It's a powerful condemnation.
What is he so worried about?
He is deeply suspicious of any ideology that he thinks stifles individual greatness
Okay.
and promotes mediocrity
And he sees the state as a tool for that kind of control.
in the name of unity or security,
Okay, then there is this idea of dying at the right time.
Yeah, for the sake of your goal, your heir.
That's a tough one.
It is.
What does he mean by that?
He is not saying to go kill yourself.
Okay, good.
It's more about choosing to end your life when you have achieved your purpose.
And passing on your legacy,
It's about affirming your life fully.
even in death.
Exactly, and not letting death just take you passively.
It's about going out on your own terms.
Yeah, it's about making sure your life has a meaningful culmination.
Okay, and then we have this really complex idea.
On redemption.
Yeah, willing backwards and the creating will struggling against the past.
Yeah, that's a naughty one.
What's he getting at there?
Well, he is wrestling with the fact that the past is unchangeable.
You can't go back and change it.
You can't... Willing backwards is a metaphor
Okay.
for accepting the past.
Even the bad parts.
All of the imperfections, the suffering, instead of being eaten up by regret,
Okay.
and the creating will that seeks to redeem the past,
By giving it new meaning.
right through present and future actions.
So it's not about dwelling on what can't be changed.
It's about using the past as a foundation for creation.
All right, let's talk about the big one.
Eternal recurrence.
It's laid out most clearly in The Wanderer and the Seven Seals.
Right.
So what is it and why is it such a huge deal?
Okay, imagine this. Every moment of your life, every joy and every sorrow, every thought, every action will repeat itself exactly as it is infinitely.
So not just generally, but like This exact conversation.
This exact conversation will happen again and again and again forever.
Whoa.
The implications are mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how you are living.
It does. It forces you to ask yourself, if you had to live this life exactly as it is for eternity,
Would you want to?
would you embrace it or would you be horrified?
That's the test.
It is.
So for Nietzsche, what does it mean to say yes to this eternal return?
To affirm the eternal recurrence is to say yes to everything in your life, the good, the bad,
Every last bit.
with such deep love and acceptance that you would live it all again.
Forever.
Eternally, it's the ultimate test of your love for life.
It's a huge challenge.
It demands that you live in a way that you would welcome the return of every moment.
So every choice matters.
Every choice, because
Right.
you will have to live with it exactly as it is forever.
That's intense.
It's a call to live authentically in the present, to create a life you would be willing to relive endlessly.
Okay, so last question. When we think about all these controversial ideas about good and evil and everything,
Right.
how do those ideas of master and slave morality fit in?
That's a good question.
You know, the ones he talks about in other parts of his work.
Right.
How do they connect to this transvaluation of values?
Well, remember, Nietzsche says there are these two basic types of morality.
Okay.
Master morality, that's the noble life-affirming perspective.
Okay.
It values strength, self-reliance, creating your own values.
What it calls good is about empowering yourself,
Exactly.
and slave morality.
That comes from the oppressed.
Okay.
It flips those values.
It emphasizes what?
Compassion, humility, resentment of the masters.
Good, it's about alleviating suffering.
Right. And evil is about the power of the masters.
So the transvaluation of values
Mhm.
is about moving beyond that slave morality
Which Nietzsche thinks dominates Western thought,
and reclaiming that master morality.
but not as a way to oppress others.
Okay.
It's about self-mastery, creating noble values that celebrate life and growth.
Okay, let's highlight some of those key quotes from part 3.
The ones that really stick with you.
We've touched on some, but let's really dive in.
Okay.
The Superman is the meaning of the earth. Why is that so powerful?
Because it's the goal Nietzsche sets for humanity.
Okay.
It's a radical shift in our purpose.
From focusing on heaven to focusing on earth.
From the divine to human potential.
And then there is that famous one, God died.
Always a conversation starter.
What does it mean for us as we go through part 3?
Well, it's the foundation.
Okay.
The death of God has created a void.
And Nietzsche's trying to fill it.
The Superman is his answer to finding meaning in a world without God.
And then his critique of the state. The state, I call it, where all are poison drinkers.
Oof. Yeah.
What's the point he's making there?
It's a condemnation of the state as this force that undermines our vitality
It makes us weak.
and encourages us to destroy ourselves through conformity and silencing dissent.
And then there is this one, there's an old illusion. It is called good and evil.
He loves to challenge those traditional ideas.
So what is he saying there?
He is saying that those absolute categories of good and evil,
The ones we often get from religion.
right, he is saying those are human constructs.
And we can question them.
We can and we should reevaluate them from a more life-affirming perspective.
This one has always stuck with me. Woe saith, hence, go, away thou woe. But everything that suffereth wanteth to live.
That's a powerful image.
What does it tell us about how Nietzsche sees life?
Well, it shows that even in the face of suffering, there is this fundamental will to live.
We don't just give up.
It's a testament to the resilience of life.
And then this one about the eternal recurrence. Joy wanted itself. It wanted eternity. It wanted recurrence.
That gets to the heart of it.
Why connect joy so closely with this idea?
Because for Nietzsche, true affirmation of life means embracing all of it
The good and the bad.
and willingly wanting it to return eternally.
If you can't embrace the thought of reliving everything, then your affirmation isn't complete.
Right.
And this one about the past. That which was, so is the stone which it cannot roll called.
That's a vivid image.
What's he trying to say there?
It's about how we can't change the past.
Mm-hmm.
And that feeling of helplessness we have when we think about what has already happened.
It's setting up the problem that he tries to solve with that idea of redemption.
Right, finding redemption in the past through action in the present.
And then that raw cry from the shepherd, bite, bite, its head off, bite.
That one stays with you.
Why is it so memorable?
I think it's the visceral image of what it takes to break free.
From those negative influences.
It's a primal call to action against our inner demons.
And finally, the question that introduces the eternal recurrence. Oh man, take heed. What saith deep Midnight's voice indeed.
Spooky.
What does it mean?
It's an invitation to confront this huge idea.
Midnight is when we face the truth.
And that direct address, it pulls you right into that philosophical struggle.
So I think we have really gone deep on this one.
I think so too.
Into part 3 of Thus Spake Zarathustra.
It's not an easy text.
Not at all, but it is thought-provoking.
It really is.
We have seen Zarathustra's journey, his critiques of society, his vision of the Superman, and that huge idea of eternal recurrence.
A lot to unpack.
So here's a final thought to leave you with.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about eternal recurrence. So imagine this, for sure that you will relive this exact life.
With everything in it.
All the good and the bad, an infinite number of times.
Whoa.
How would that change how you live right now?
That's a big question.
What new values would you create for yourself, knowing that every choice you make will echo through eternity?
That's something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Nietzsche.
We hope it's inspired you to explore his ideas even further.